With all due respect to the Los Angeles Rams defensive line, our gender panel truly has the fearsome foursome. Annie Apple has been described as a force of nature. She's a blogger and correspondent and an experienced writer with production credits in local television, NBC News, CNN. But about a year ago at last year's NFL draft, she burst onto the scene with a new title, NFL Supermom, as the mother of, as she calls him, Black Eli Apple, the New York Giants' first-round pick. I'm glad you're laughing about that. Now, talk about well-rounded. Julie DiCaro majored in journalism and French in college, but then became a lawyer and spent 15 years in criminal and family court before, some could say she took the intelligent step, others might say, why in God's name would you enter the world of sports writing and sports radio? But very quickly, she's become one of the leading voices of female advocacy in the country. Now, I hope all you got a chance to read Shira Springer's terrific story in Wednesday's Globe on running while female. It's the kind of deeply reported and beautifully written piece that truly is her trademark. She's now successfully transitioned to the world of radio across the street at WBUR, bringing her unique voice and style to NPR. And oh, by the way, with the marathon in sight in just a few days, she has run 19 marathons. And finally, Dara Torres. The 12-time Olympic medalist swimmer has been called one of the greatest female athletes of our generation. As was discussed on the last panel, I want to take a page out of Serena Williams' book and say, no way. She should not be restricted by her gender. Dara Torres is clearly one of the greatest athletes of our generation. Here's a preview of our panel, Gender, Separate but Equal.
And 4-0. Lloyd earning the first hat trick ever in a Women's World Cup final with a 54-yard goal.
Being a woman is just a whole new set of problems from society.
Women are making up nearly 50% of sports fans in all the 4 major professional sports, and so I think there's a lot of us that just sort of feel like someone has to speak for the women.
It's amazing to watch your kid from a small child work towards something and then actually have the privilege and honor to see him walk out that dream. So we were all really, really excited. Look how handsome he looks.
I always think of, am I giving the reader the important information, telling them something they don't already know? Because that's really important to me.
So when you add up all Dara Torres' Olympic medals and the record setting, you throw in longevity on top of that, and the fact that she skipped 2 Olympics and still was able to come back, I think it's one of the greatest Olympic careers we've ever seen.
Just spectacular.
I have to say, I was watching while making dinner, and my little girl said, "Mommy, they just scored again." And I said, "Honey, that's an instant replay. There's no way they just scored again."
This team taught all America's children that playing like a girl means you're a badass.
Welcome, Julie DiCaro, Shira Springer, Dara Torres, and Annie Apple. You're right there? That leg? We're not going to ask how many this is for you because we stopped counting at the surgeries. But welcome, women.
Thank
so
you.
I know that to this day, a bit much to my chagrin, when people know that I've loved sports my whole life, their first question is, "Oh, did you have brothers?" Which is kind of annoying. No, I just loved sports my entire life. I didn't need a reason. For each of you, what's the first memory you had where you knew as a kid that you loved sports?
Am I starting? I don't remember a time before sports. I don't remember I don't remember discovering sports. I remember the 1976 Olympics. I was really, really little. I remember watching Nadia Comaneci then, and I decided I wanted to be a gymnast. But I think most of it was my dad put me in sports very young. He coached all my teams. He coached boys too, but my dad will tell you that he'd rather coach women and girls than he would boys. He just thinks it's more fun. And so for me, it was a way that our family spent time together, was through sports. And it was, sitting down on the couch with my dad on Sunday mornings and watching the Bears, watching the Cubs during the summer. It was just something our family always did. So for me, it's always been a huge part of my life.
I would say I didn't have any brothers, but I had a terrifically supportive grandfather and father. And the memory I have from when I was younger was Christine Lilly, one of the all-time greats for U.S. women's soccer, played at a high school, maybe an hour and a half away from where I grew up. And my grandfather and my father took my sister and I, two young soccer players, to watch her play in high school. And I remember that game so vividly. It was nasty fall Connecticut weather. It was raining, the wind was blowing, and but we were out there, and it was important for them, my grandfather and my father, to put a female role model in front of us to show us that, hey, this is what women's sports is, this is what you can do. And to this day, I still have vivid memories, and I would say that's when I kind of really thought about how much I love sports, how much I wanted to do something in sports, and how much I wanted to play sports for as long as I could.
I actually have 4 older brothers, so I'm the opposite of everyone else.
But they are not the reason you were in the pool.
No, well, my mom would take us to the pool. My brothers were swimming and I wasn't. And I'm not sure if it was because I just bugged her so much that why are they doing that and I can't, and I think it was more of an age thing than anything, because my mom was always proactive, girls and playing sports. But I wanted to do what they were doing, and I wanted to beat them. So I was running all over the bleachers for months, and my mom just couldn't control me, and finally said, all right, here, you go swim. And I did, and stayed in it a lot longer than they did. They lasted about a year, and I think once their sisters started to beat them, that was it for them.
For me, I have brothers, but they were never into sports. I just generally loved March Madness. I love NCAA basketball. In the 90s. I started watching sports, I think, like 1990, and I loved it. It was the drama, it was entertainment, it was performance. The Fab Five, UNLV, UNC, Duke, that got me really loving basketball. Then I fell in love with football because I had one of my classmates he was really heavily into it. We had a kid at our high school whose brother at the time was playing for the Dallas Cowboys. So of course, Dallas Cowboys were winning then. They haven't won anything since, but I digress. But that's when the heyday, so I became this Cowboys fan and, just fell in love with the game. And I played basketball in high school. Then I got knocked up and they wouldn't let me play, although I could have still dribbled around their stomach. But I was like the original teen mom before they were making MTV shows about us. I was like that, but I still love the game. And I have 3 sons who, love sports, play sports. And as a mom, you are like the first coach. You are the first trainer. You're the first nutritionist. You are all that. So I've never imagined or looked at sports or visualized it without a woman's influence, ever.
Actually, I just thought about something. You have 2 sons, Julie.
I do.
You coach them, or you work
I did.
them?
I coached them in baseball and in soccer.
Good for you. That I love to hear. That's something that I love to hear. All right. In terms of gender issues, what's burning out there for you? Shira, I know everything is burning for you, but whether it's from an athlete's perspective, whatever, what are the issues out there regarding gender in sports that really are germane?
I'm going to start because everything's burning for me. If I could pick one, it probably is, and it was something that was touched upon in the race panel, which is lack of development to get black coaches up to the head coaching ranks and potentially ownership ranks. It's the lack of development for women. And that's whether it's as writers, as broadcasters, as coaches, assistant coaches. The typical, I have seen and know of men who will start as an executive assistant for a head coach in the NBA and work their way to the bench as a coach. And that pathway isn't open for women. And it was interesting, I did a little bit of a sidetrack here. I did a story on women in construction. And they taught me a term I'd never heard of, which is called checkerboarding, which is when women in the construction profession are moved around to different jobs so that they never get the proficiency they need at one task and can't raise to get up to the level of foreman on certain jobs. And sometimes I think that's what happens in the sports industry. Women are sort of moved around to different positions or put into positions, they may come into a team situation and say, I'm really interested in coaching, but somehow they end up in PR or human resources. That's one of my big kind of things that get me angry. I wish there was more development. There is starting to be in the NBA. The coaches in the NBA, have invited more women into an annual sort of, it's like a coaching summit. The commissioners there, GMs are there. It allows the women to network.
They actually added it in the National Football League also.
Oh, okay. So I think it's starting, but there needs to be more conscientious development of women across the sports world.
And to piggyback, I think it can't start with the NBA. I think it has to start high school level, collegiate level,
Yes.
because you have to open doors for those. And unfortunately, especially in football and college level, there are no women. And as far as any coaching, or maybe you'll see a personal trainer here and there, or maybe a nutritionist. So I think you can't just all of a sudden say, hey, we need them on the pro level, but we make no efforts to kind of bring them up the levels from youth to even high school to even collegiate. And also, it's not just a male problem. I think maybe it's also for women as well, because maybe for a lot of women, if you had a woman coaching your football team in high school, how many people would probably be in arms about that? So I think the change has to start with all of us, not just the men.
Agreed.
Yeah. My sport's a little bit different because it's an individual sport, and there wasn't a lot of money in the sport of swimming. There's not a lot of money in the sport of swimming, so it wasn't really a big issue for women. I think in swimming, though, we would like to see the women swim the mile like the men do. There's no reason why they can't. I mean, look at Katie Ledecky. She's probably like 10 times faster than more than half the men in the U.S. So there's no reason why, as far as like distance goes, that women can't do what the men do, and why they have to swim.
And they have the 1500 at the World Championships,
Yep.
but not at the Olympics. So
Yeah.
what's up with that?
I don't know, but I think there are more women are starting to stand up and say, why can't the women swim a mile? Because right now, if you guys don't know the sport of swimming, the women always swim the 800 and the men swim the 1500, which is the mile. So it'd be nice to see that, but having done a show this week, a all-women's sports talk show that Andrea and I both work on, we were talking a little bit about equal pay in sports, and I know you guys are talking about coaches and stuff, but it was really nice to see the hockey team stand up for what they believed in to get more pay, and also the U.S. women's soccer team. I mean, they bring in the revenue, they have the crowds. Why can't they make what the men make?
Yeah, and just piggybacking off what Shira said at the beginning, in broadcasting, and not necessarily so much in TV, but definitely in radio and definitely in sports writing, there's such a dearth of women. And, I hear over and over again, we hire the best person. We hire the best person. Well, I thought Jemele Hill had a great line in the race panel when she said, diversity doesn't come knock on your door. You have to go and cultivate it. You have to invest in people. You have to bring people along. And that is not happening at the level that it should. I mean, women make up nearly from anywhere from a third to a half of every Major League Sports fan base. And there's absolutely no one catering to the female audience at all, or even acknowledging that it exists. That's a huge issue for me.
Adding the fashion line on NFLshop.com doesn't
Yeah,
do it for you?
or pink stuff for Mother's Day. It's always great. And the other issue for me is domestic violence against women in general by athletes. And the thing that's really been a slog for me the past couple of years is there's a group of women in sports writing who I think are trying to educate the masses about the criminal justice system and about violence against women. Because when Levy Smith comes out and says, Jameis Winston was found not guilty by a jury. No, that's not true. He was never charged. Nothing ever went before a jury. There was no evidence. No one found him not guilty. That language matters. And people need to understand the differences in being found innocent, being found guilty, and having charges dropped and not being charged, why prosecutors don't charge certain things, so that everything that comes out of athletes' mouths when they're supporting their teammates doesn't sound like she's a liar.
I just want to say something also to circle back about the pay equity issue. All of this is related. The fact that women aren't in positions where they are decision makers, the fact that USA Hockey has a dearth of women in positions of power, that's what translates, that's what the result is the pay inequity and the lack of support that the women's programs get. So it's, we can kind of slice and dice it all up, but really this is all connected in terms of we got to get more women in certain positions, and then hopefully things will follow.
All right, let me, just for those, just a very quick recap for people to understand, and then I just want to finalize your thoughts on this pay equity issue. So in women's soccer, 5 of the biggest names in the sport filed a federal wage discrimination complaint that is actually still pending with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. But they just signed a new 5-year collective bargaining agreement that has more than a 30% increase in base pay, improved benefits, significant gains in travel issues and working conditions. So that's for women's soccer. For women's hockey, after 15 months of negotiations and a 2-week boycott, they signed a new 4-year contract with increased pay and support 3 days before the World Championship began, which the women went on to win their 4th consecutive title. So, what do you make, especially as the athlete here, Dara, what do you make of this fight for equal pay, especially in these 2 team sports?
The only thing I have to say about that is there shouldn't be a fight. There shouldn't be an issue. I mean, the fact that, kudos to them for standing up for boycotting before, the championship game.
Leverage.
Yeah, it is leverage, but they shouldn't have to do this. It just should not be an issue, and it's so sad to see that it's still an issue today.
To piggyback off that, how they were, really productive by boycotting and kind of protesting days before. You asked earlier about what burns you, and I think college athletics who bring in millions of dollars, billions of dollars, don't get a dime of it. And for me, that was always a burning matter. I remember about 3 years ago when we were preparing to go win the national title. That was a big thing where we will see coaches, their families board private jets. They're all taken care of, and you have players' families who could not even afford to go to the game. So there was something I became very vocal about. There's too much money there. So for me, that is something that, but unfortunately, it will never change until, just like the women showed us how to do it, until you stand up and say, no, I deserve more than this. But I think on the issue of equal pay, it's tough for women. And I have to say it's even tougher for Black women, because you are not only a woman, but you're African American, so you are immediately always put in a box. And you're always paid less. And you're always, many times your talents aren't allowed to breathe because people will see you and say, no, you can only do this. No, you can only do that. And, when I came out and I spoke out and people were just looking like, oh, you're just a mom. I'm like, as Black women, feel like we always have to walk around wearing our college degrees and our resumes. No, I'm just not this. I'm also this and that. So I think there is, when it comes to gender issues, I think it's been harder, it's extremely harder for African-American women, especially in sports.
And not only should it not be a fight, but the other unfortunate part of this is the fact that this is when women's sports get attention. I don't think anybody would have known that the World Championships for women's hockey were coming up unless they staged a boycott. And that, in addition to the unequal pay and the unequal support, is the real tragedy of this, is that has become how women's sports is now known and getting headlines.
And the thing that's really even more upsetting than that is that I know from several of the women that were covering the Women's Hockey World Championships said that a lot of the hockey beat writers that were there who are male, when they weren't writing, were complaining about it, saying how it was low rent and it was a clown show, and why do I have to be here? I can't believe they're making me cover this. When those are the people that are giving you the news about that team, that's a problem.
And you are covering the best women's hockey players in the world. These are incredible. Who was it who was saying? I think it was it Don Sweeney or Bob Sweeney who was saying that he plays with Hillary Knight and just blown away by her talent. These are high caliber athletes who are, I just don't get it. I just don't get, it's frustrating.
And, to put the final point on the pay equity issue, not something that I care to or like to remind people, but just in the sense of sports being the microcosm of society, remember that in the United States, women still make 80 cents to the dollar for men. So if sports can lead the way for any kind of equity issue, I think we're all for it. You mentioned Julie, the domestic violence issue. Annie, you mentioned you are more than just a sports mom. Last season, the New York Giants kept kicker Josh Brown on their roster despite their knowledge of his issues with domestic violence. Only when the public outcry became so strong did they release him. No surprise, folks, this did not sit well with Annie, whose son, you may recall, was the New York Giants' first-round pick and their star rookie. And she took to Twitter to express her displeasure. Mother, more importantly, a human. It's not about my son's boss, it's about Molly's suffering. What made you, you went out there, because Eli had to take a little bit of heat for that, but why did you feel so strongly about this?
I think at the end of the day, life is all about this connection we all have. And there's nothing more important than doing what you feel in your heart is right. At this point, you know, because even during training camp, you did hear the rumblings and different stuff, and you know, you just sit back and you just listen. I think for me, the point of frustration and just confusion was just the fact that, hello, people, this is a woman. Because I think there was no really attention paid to who Molly Brown was and what she went through. It was all about, you know, my teammate, he's a good guy, or he's this, or, you know, he's that. And it was just like they were just blowing it off. And it was really tough to do, just to relive those horrible years that I, you know, went through. But I think it's important. And that's what makes it, you know, when you're a woman, when you're a mother, when you're a professional, at the end of the day, you can't compartmentalize everything in the sense of, this was important. This was, you know, an education moment, because maybe sometimes people don't know better, or they have this perception of what a domestic violence person is like. I think it's one thing I wrote in my essay piece was that, you know, people look at me and they're like, oh my God, you're so smart, you're so happy. No, happy women suffer from domestic violence. You know, smart women, it's not just something where there's poor women or there's black women, there's brown women. This is something that affects all of us. And it was very important to take a stand. And it was an unpopular one because, you know, a lot of people were like, well, that's your son's boss. I'm like, okay, what does that have to do with what's right and what's wrong? And I think Eli knows me. He knows from even Ohio State, where I did, you know, I had to go up to Urban, you know, and I had to get him to side and support us, to fight for parents. You know, the College Football Player Committee went finally and approved the stipend for families 5 days before the first, you know, playoff game. That took balls. And I think with, you know, everyone came to Eli asking about your mom. He just knew, for me, this is how I am. If something is wrong, I will speak out against it. And being a survivor of domestic violence, I connected with Molly's suffering. And for the organization to be so callous, maybe blind, maybe they were blindly, because all the guys, you know, he's a good guy. No, you're not a good guy if you're beating your wife. You know what I mean? That does not make you may kick well, you may block well, but you're not a good guy if you're hitting your wife or your girlfriend. Breaking news. You know, hashtag, you're not a good guy. So I think because many times we do focus on the actual physical ability. If you can do this, and I always say talent is just talent. Talent is not a virtue. You know, it doesn't make you a good person because you can ball. You have to be a good person by the decisions and actions you make.
And this goes back to the education thing as well. I mean, you know, there's all this brouhaha about how the NFL and MLB and everyone's going to educate their players. Who they really need to educate are the coaches and the owners, because they're the ones just sort of dismissing this stuff and blowing it off and saying, oh, he's a great guy. We saw it with the Bears in Chicago when they brought Ray McDonald in and they talked to his parents and his college coach who said he was a great guy. So they said, oh, well, he's a good guy.
Ray McDonald, who had numerous domestic violence issues when he was with the San Francisco 49ers.
And sexual assault charge as well. And, you know, there are things that the society in general should know. That, you know, domestic abusers are often extremely charming, popular, friendly people. They are experts at lying. All these kinds of things that the general public maybe doesn't know, but they get their information a lot of times through these cases involving athletes. And so it's really important that they get correct information. And when you have a whole locker room of guys saying, like the Cubs did with Aroldis Chapman, oh, he's a great guy. They call him Chappie. He fired a gun 8 times at his wife, or not at, but in the vicinity of his wife and newborn baby. He's not a great guy.
And also, you have to also look at the backlash. And first of all, you're a woman, you're speaking out, and it's football, it's a very masculine sport. So, on social media, you can imagine all the names that I was called, everything that was said about you to you. And I felt like a lot of it, the sports media was also trying to pit my son and I against each other, which was so crazy because Eli's my favorite kid on Wednesdays. Only on Wednesday is the day he was born, so he's my favorite on that day. And so it became this contentious thing, and I'm like, no, it's not about us. It's about the issue of domestic violence. And I think for me, putting myself out there, I think what was very comforting, I got so many emails and different stuff from people, from men, women, who have lived through this in their family. I had somebody email me, they were like, this was just normal for us, to see my dad do this and to see, how my parents interacted. So for me, it was great conversation, but it took a lot of risks to take. And there was, you got the Giants, people like, oh, do you hate them? I'm like, no, I don't hate the Giants. I like Jerry's, it's a business. I said, I do love them, but anything you love, you want to see it be the best it can be. I love football. I'm not just a football mom, I'm a football, I love the game. So I want it to be the best it can be, and for it to be the best, we all have to open our mouths. And I say to women and girls, if there's something about the sport you like, don't say, well, I'm not going to watch anymore. No, use your voice to make it better.
Talking about social media, the impact that you had on it. We all know, though, that one of the biggest issues in social media, particularly Twitter, is its anonymous nature. And harassment is especially acute for female sportscasters. So last year, Julie was one of the subjects of a very powerful public service announcement that went viral as 3 men read to her face tweets that were written about her. Here's an excerpt from More Than Mean.
Julie DiCaro is a run-of-the-mill, mediocre beat writer. Not atrocious, not good. Just sorta there.
I'm actually not a beat writer at all, but okay.
One of the players should beat you to death with their hockey stick, like the whore you are.
Hopefully this skank Julie DiCaro is Bill Cosby's next victim. That would be classic.
I don't know what to say to that.
I don't.
We were all amazed by the reaction we got to that. I don't know what to say. At this point, I've seen it so many times. It happens on such a regular basis to so many women. And there are certainly people now in the mainstream media who are part of churning up their followers to do this to women.
Can I ask you, do you think it changed anything?
I don't know. I think that like anything else, we talk about it for a little bit and then it sort of falls off the page and then we forget about it and we move on to the next issue. I don't know that it's a result of us complaining about harassment or if it's a function of Twitter not being able to sell stuff to other people because they're upset about the harassment. But Twitter has introduced some pretty good filtering tools that have made a lot of our lives better. The trade-off, though, is that they're not getting rid of these people. They're just making it so that you can hide what they say. So if someone is threatening your life, you don't see it, which is great for your mental well-being. But, if someone knows where I live and is threatening to kill me, I probably want to know. So it's a trade-off.
Wasn't something posted online, a picture of your home?
It was actually a picture of my office. I go into my office from a very private small entrance that not too many people know about to the building. And someone took a picture of it and sent it to me on Twitter. The worst thing I ever got was a bound naked woman being held by a group of men and her throat was slit, and they were draining her blood into a bucket.
Are you serious?
Yeah, and I don't know if
Did
it
you
was. I don't
report
know
it?
if it was. Yeah, I did, and I actually even reported it to the police, and the police were like, well, "I don't know what to do about that." And that.
I mean, again, we shouldn't. We should be appalled, but we're not really surprised. But I mean, why? Why do women receive this much vitriol for, in this case, doing our jobs as sportscasters, sports writers, sports journalists, sports commentators?
Yeah, I hear guys say all the time, I go to sports to get away from women. The last thing I want to hear is some woman telling me what the score was last night, And so I think there's this idea that sports is the traditional last bastion of men where they don't have to be near women. So I think there's an element of that involved. There's also, different trolls want different things. There's some really disturbed people out there who get their kicks out of doing this. There's people who just want attention, and there's people who do it for bonus points from guys that they perceive to be, sort of heroes. So, for example, there's a website out there that every time I say something, they all retweet it to the leaders of the website so they can see it and they can all come attack me. It's a really weird dynamic.
I think it's also for, people don't expect women to be outspoken. They don't expect us to express our opinion about a sport because they may feel, well, you don't play, you don't know. And I always say, how can you be greater than something you came out of? To me, like, I have never known one man to give a birth to a baby. If you have, please stand up so we can recognize you and call the police. Seriously, I mean, every man's come out of a woman. So for me, it's so, even with your son playing in the NFL where there are different things, he'll lean on you. People will say, oh, Eli and I were close. We're like, oh, but that's your mom. Like, as if my presence in his life makes him weak. And I say, no, it gives him a great balance. Because growing up, with kids and in sports, I've always seen the moms, but it's the moms who are out there. Joey Bosa's mom, Cheryl, and I, we're friends, and her son Nick plays at Ohio State. And she said when they were little, they live, a nice area, but where they lived, they didn't have really great football team. So of course she took them to where she thought the best youth football teams were, and it was predominantly African American. And that really changed the scope of how they learned to play the game, how they learned. And it was so funny, Nick Bosa, she was like, Nick would come home and he would see all the kids with afro. He's like, he would pray every day, I want an afro, because he had this straight hair. Now if you see Nick Bosa, he got an afro. So it's like God blessed him with the afro. But I'm just saying, like, this is women's influence in the game. And I think we want to kind of detach that. You can't. We are fans. I mean, the amount of my friends and I who watch football, who, we attend games, and we have an opinion. I think we're free to express it. But you do, I mean, the names, especially football season, if I have an opinion, if your kid plays for the Giants and you say something about Tony Romo, oh my God, it's like, you're a whore. I was like, why do we always go to the whore thing? Like, can we get original? Like, what is with the whore? You're this, you're that, and all the names. And I think for me, I'm a West African woman, so it takes a lot to offend me. So I'm not easily offended. I always focus on, are you being who you are? Are you being true to yourself? Well, then let God take care of the rest.
Well, and I think one of the big issues with, I totally agree with you. And I think that especially because there are so many women who are speaking out about hot button issues, talking about violence against women, talking about racism in sports, pay equality. And there's a lot of guys out there who are like, I don't want to think about this when I'm watching football. Don't tell me, and so they get upset, they get angry, and they start yelling things at you. But I always feel like if you can just watch a football game, divorced from everything else, divorced from racism and sexism and misogyny and, unequal pay for women and things like that, then you have a lot of privilege that the rest of us don't have. Because when I watch a football game and I see a guy out there who's been accused of sexual assault or domestic violence, it bothers me, and it makes me remember, and it makes me think less of the organization. So a lot of us don't have the privilege of just watching football and only thinking about sports.
Dara, I don't know if you've had any of these personal experiences where you've had, comments against you, but you're the mom of a daughter. So knowing that this is out there, this culture is out there, whatever it is, what are your thoughts?
She's very limited to her social media. She's been asking to go on Twitter and some other sites. I'm trying to be the mom that doesn't like look at her phone and see what's going on, but she was following like Kim Kardashian, and like I had no idea. Like I said you can go on Instagram, and that, you know, that's pretty much it, and her Musically. And when I saw, she was at that point she was 8, so she's almost 11 now. But I try to monitor at least what's on there, but it's difficult because you know, she's at that age where she's starting to understand things more and more, and understanding the word whore and, you know, other words that are out there. And
How would you even explain some of this stuff to your daughter?
I would just say that those are very wimpy men, especially the ones who you know, are unknown on Twitter, that don't, you know, you can't get a hold of, that oh yeah, it's easy for them to say that because they're not saying who they actually are. So, but it's a process, I think, for me. I mean, she's my only child, and so it's all kind of new to me too. And I am very, very careful about what I put on social media, because something happened to me a long time ago, and I started getting called names, and it was just, and it had nothing to do with sports.
Can you share? Or?
Yeah, I just when Patrick Swayze passed away a while ago, I had said, you know, R.I.P. and so sad to see, and all that kind of stuff. And then I said, I just wish, you know, he had stopped smoking. And you know, I think he had like liver cancer or pancreatic or something. And I just started getting like overwhelming tweets back about, you know, well, smoking doesn't cause, you know, cancer in the liver, so why are you saying that? And he should smoke all he wants, and did it, you know. And I was just, and I started going back, and you know, this is when Twitter first started, and I started going back and saying, well, you know, he did say he's doing everything he can to, you know, fight this, but then why is he still smoking? And then my agent was following me. He's like, just stop, you know. I'm like, but I can't help it. These people, they're like yelling at me, and I got to yell back, and you know. And so I learned like very quickly, you know, just they're going to be who they are, and you can't just start, you know, have arguments with them. And so I'm just very careful about now what I tweet.
See, that's one of the bad effects of this, though, is that like then you silence people's voices, and women self-censor because they know what's going to happen if they speak out.
Well, I have a 16-year-old daughter, and you know, the rule in our house was no social media till you hit high school, because like, what do you have to say to anybody? You know, anyway, like sit down. You have nothing to say to high school. So that was the rule. And I remember whatever you have to say, tell us. Like, you don't need to talk to strangers right now online. And you know, I remember a few years ago, my daughter asked me randomly, you know, I don't know what she was listening to. She was like, Mom, what's a prostitute? So I told her, you know, a woman who sells herself. And she was like, and the first thing she said to me is, I wish I never knew that. You know, just like, so she just liked to be, you know, closed off. But I thought it's, for kids and social media, for us, it was like, wherever you are, mom and dad, we have to be. It's like you wouldn't leave your child at a mall in Germany and go to Florida. But when your kid is online and you have no access, so who they're interacting with, where they are, it is dangerous. I mean, it's a different reality. Their physical body may be home, but if their mind and their attention is elsewhere, you're not there, it's terrifying. But I try, you know, and you know, with Eli being in a spotlight, and you know, everything you tweet is under scrutiny, and you know, people are like, well, has it changed? How are you? I'm like, I can't change. I'm 42 years old. There's no way I'm changing. And this is pretty much who you get. I've been on Twitter since 2009. I don't think it should change what I tweet or how I interact, because my son happens to play football every week. You know, so I think when you just maintain who you are, and yeah, it's gonna come with the random insults from like the miserable people living in their mom's basement and owing her $43 in rent they haven't paid yet, and they're online bothering you. You know, who are now trolling you, by the way. Who are trolling you. And it gets, you know, people get vicious, especially around football season. And if you give it an analysis that they don't agree with, or you say something they don't agree with, and it's always, well, you know, I always say, you know, Twitter will argue anything. It's like, I like blue. Why don't you like red? Why do you hate red? It's like, no, I just like blue. You know, everything you do is just, and say is under scrutiny, but you can't let that dictate how you interact with people, embrace people, and how you live.
As the mother of boys, I think it's really important to teach young men and young women how to use social media. So I've been the mom who's been following my kids. They have to friend me. They have to follow me. I follow everything they say. When I first gave my son his phone, the first thing he did was he went on Instagram and he joined a group of his friends in body shaming Demi Lovato. And I immediately took his phone. We took it away from him and said, we'll try again in a month. And we've talked about how, you know, social media, we use it to lift people up, not to tear people down. But there are so many guys out there who say these, like the other night, some guy was like calling Jessica Mendoza every word in the book and telling her, let a man do a man's job and you whore and you can't get out of there. And in his picture, he's got 2 daughters on his lap. And I always wonder, where are the women in these men's lives? Do you not see what they do and what they do to other women online? So I'm very involved in the social media of all the men in my family and my male friends, because I'm not going to...
Really super quick, how did your 2 sons handle that video?
You
Because
know,
how long, by the way, just for people who may not, how long was the entire PSA, the entire video?
6 minutes, something like that.
6 minutes. So you guys saw about 30 seconds of it. That was 6 minutes of those kind of misogynistic tweets being read to their faces. So how did your boys, I'm just curious.
You know, they were, I think, okay with it because I was okay at the time I showed it to them. What they had missed was the year before that, when I was really upset and down all the time, because I was sort of learning how to handle it. But, you know, I put on a brave face when they were around, even though, like, you know, a lot of times I was just, all I wanted to do was, like, watch SVU and watch Olivia Benson, like, destroy men is, like, self-care. But, so as long as I was okay when I explained it to them, they were okay, and they just wanted to know that, are you okay, though? Do you feel okay? Are you happy? You know, and as long as they heard that from me, they were okay with it.
I think there's also another interesting aspect to this social media, Twitter conversation. And that's the fact that many women's sports teams rely on social media because they don't have these robust broadcast contracts. They rely on social media, streaming, Twitter, Facebook, to spread the word about what they're doing, when their games are. I mean, I think most of the NWHL games, the Women's Professional Hockey League, their games are live streamed on their league website. I mean, that's the main methods through social media that fans find out about women's sports. And on top of that, to go back to the pay inequity issue, or the equal pay issue, better way to say it, the word about that was spread through social media. That there was a point in time in that fight where the USA hockey officials were going to people on rec league teams, Division III hockey teams, Division I hockey teams, players who hadn't played in 2 or 3 years, and saying, would you be basically a scab? Would you come in and create this women's national team for the World Championships? And all of the women refused, but all of the women refused very, very publicly, and basically shamed USA Hockey on Twitter, on social media. They all had the same hashtag. It was something like "live boldly and others will follow," or something like that. And so I think, you know, yes, we talk about this and there is that aspect of it, but it's also even tougher for women because they are so reliant oftentimes when they are building up leagues and building fan followings for their sports. They're reliant on social media and the power of that to either spread their message or to increase their fandom.
I know that at the Olympic Games, at least this past one, I'm not sure about 2012, but you know, the USOC and the NGBs, which are the national governing bodies, are very try to educate the athletes on what they should and shouldn't say, especially just during the Olympic Games, because there are some idiot athletes out there that have tweeted some stuff that have gotten them in trouble. And so at least as far as the USA goes, I know that they really keep a close eye on, at least during that time, what the athletes are saying and what they can and can't say.
And I think also that's where the change has to start. The change is not going to start with just women. I think Jemele made a good point earlier when she said it's about other people also opening their mouths. I think when the sport world, from the owners to the GMs, when it starts to reflect diversity in as far as gender and as far as women, and seeing women in those roles of power as far as within sports, then I think the fans will catch up. Because right now, when you're used to looking at a team and you see all guys and all, you know, from the players to the coaches to the whatever, it almost to a crazy fan, to a fan, feel like women are intruding on their sport, you know, intruding. But I think when we start to open it up and realize that we bring a lot to it, we bring a lot to be desired and cherished, then it would change the landscape. But it has to start with other players. You know, one thing I always say, we have to change the way men think and see women. That's where it starts. We're trying to legislate and dictate and correct behavior without first attacking the culture that makes that behavior permissible or cute.
Well, thank you for segueing perfectly.
I do what I can for humanity.
I'm telling you, man, it's unbelievable. But the sexist way that women are depicted in the media is a very significant issue as well. And we're going to have two disparate clips here, but it can start at an early age. As we're going to see from Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback Jameis Winston, who was speaking to a class of 5th graders recently down in Florida. But it doesn't even stop on the biggest stage in sports, which are the Olympic Games, as demonstrated in NBC's coverage of swimming in Rio. So let's take a look at these two examples.
Sportscasters and different media publications are facing criticism for the way they have covered female athletes that have competed in the Olympics and won some pretty notable medals. So the first instance is a Hungarian swimmer by the name of Katinka Hosszú. And apparently she just broke a record that's extremely, extremely difficult. It's her win for the 400-meter individual medley. When the Hungarian swimmer spoke to NBC's Dan Hicks, he remarked that her husband is the guy responsible for her success, and it's impossible to tell her story without giving him credit. Now, I should note that her husband is her coach.
All my young boys stand up, man. The ladies sit down. Sit down. But all my boys stand up. Stand up. We strong, right? We strong. We strong, right? Okay, all my boys, just tell me one time. I can do anything I put my mind to. A lot of boys don't supposed to be soft-spoken. You know what I'm saying? One day y'all gonna have a very deep voice like this. Right now y'all talking like this, but one day y'all have a very, very deep voice. But the ladies, they supposed to be silent, polite, gentle. But my men supposed to be strong.
Silent, polite, gentle. Well, nobody will accuse this panel of being any of those, but that's okay.
When I'm sleeping, I'm silent.
Exactly. All right. Let me start with our, not to put our dear friend Dan Hicks, throw him under the bus here, Dara, but this was a pretty ignominious moment. This is the highlight of this female swimmer's career, and her husband is credited for it. Now, you've always had male coaches, and they've done a great job with you, but I'm never going to credit them for your accomplishments. So the way that they are depicted, how troublesome is this?
That was kind of asinine what I just saw, but you know, if you want to credit your coach, let the athlete credit the coach. You know, the coaches have a tough role, and people always ask me, you know, why aren't I coaching? And I just think that I don't have the heart to be able to coach swimmers and let someone down if I didn't do it the right way. So they do have a big role, obviously, in your success, but you're the one out there every morning, getting in the pool, doing the workouts, eating right, sleeping, watching after your kid if you have a kid when you're an athlete, just whatever it is, you're the one doing that. And so that was very disturbing to see that quote up there. I have actually never heard of a journalist saying something like that. It just, I don't know. I'll have to have a little chat with Dan Hicks, I think.
But you knew about it, right? You'd heard
No,
it.
I didn't actually.
Oh, is this the first time you've ever heard
That's my first
this?
time seeing that, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I was in Rio, but I was doing the radio stuff, so I
No,
didn't.
it was live. I mean,
Oh,
it was,
yeah,
it
so
was
I didn't-
live. They cut to a shot of him in the stands, and they said, this is the man responsible for her success. And it was her.
Yeah, he definitely could have worded it a little differently. And we both know Dan, and he has daughters, and he's married to
3 daughters.
Right, and I don't think he meant it that way. And I'm not trying to defend him but the fact that he has daughters and he has a very strong woman as a wife.
Hannah Storm.
Yes, Hannah Storm. So I'm sure it just was his wording that wasn't. I'm not trying to, again, defend him, but that's just not like him to say something like that.
I just want to say,
As for the Jameis Winston clip, I mean, talk about, you know, depicting women. Oh, my goodness.
Can I just jump back, though, to the
Oh, yeah, sure, of
Olympics
course.
thing? What's interesting, though, I think if you want to look for some sort of silver lining or hope in this, and we'll get to Jameis Winston in a second, but I met a husband who was also an athlete and a coach of a female player on the Norwegian women's handball team. And so just to broaden this out to an international perspective, because it is the Olympics, the Norwegian women's handball team is absolutely revered. They are rock stars in Norway. And to me, and I did a whole piece on them after meeting this guy randomly on the subway in Rio, to me, it was an example of, one, culturally, something is sometimes askew in certain countries. It's not just America, but there are countries, there are places where they do respect female athletes, and they do cover women's handball in Norway seriously. They are critical of it. They are analytic about it. I was there after the match, and there were 20 reporters, which is a huge number for a country like Norway. And so part of me wonders what's wrong culturally with what we're saying or not doing, because I've seen evidence internationally that women can be treated differently as athletes, that they can be looked upon, that the image is not the same, that it wouldn't ever occur to somebody in the Norwegian media to say something similar to what Dan Hicks said.
I got to go back to the Jameis Winston thing, because we're talking about the way that he's portraying women, and who's modeling the behavior for especially for these male athletes. Because look, this could be a cultural thing for him. I mean, he grew up and this is how women should be. Now, I need to say parenthetically, obviously, that Jameis Winston, while he did win the Heisman Trophy in 2013, was accused of sexual assault and has had these issues in his past, which makes it even more disturbing. But I mean, you can't do this in 2017. You can't say, boys stand up, be strong, girls sit down, be polite.
But I think what we're doing is we're looking at exactly what he said to those, to those kids, which was wrong, but we have to go beyond that. You can only come out with what's inside you. And if you were raised a certain way, no excuse, but I think we have to get to a point where we're able to look back and say, okay, let me see where you're coming from, because sometimes people are raised differently. And, he's much more Southern, or what, maybe in his family, the dynamics, it was very, in a lot of different culture, there, that's how it is. For me, what was shocking is he's a professional and he still holds these views. So at some point, coaches in high school, coaches in college, before you get to the pro, they have to do a better job of teaching these young men exactly what is right as far as interaction and depiction of women. Because I think, you want him to say the right thing, but if it's not right in his heart, it's never going to come out of his mouth. So I think the coaches, as said before, have to do a lot better job of really teaching the X's and O's of real life, not just the game.
And I think it goes even beyond that, because if you recall what Jameis Winston said afterwards about what he said to that school group, he goes, it was a poor word choice, poor choice of words. And you can't let him off the hook that easily. You can't let someone like Jameis Winston, with his history, excuse it by saying it was a poor word choice. It was so much more than a poor choice of words. There is some ingrained attitude toward women there that has to be addressed, and people need to call him on it. It's the same thing when you're talking about somebody who's committed an act of domestic violence, an athlete, and we go and say, oh, he's a great guy, thinking only about what he does on the field. Words matter, and you have to be calling these athletes on them continually, and not letting coaches, owners, whoever it is, excuse their behavior.
But
let them excuse their own behavior.
I've been around football a lot because I have, my son who's played. So you have guys he played with, not just in high school and college, but also guys he may train with from other teams. He's even trained with Devin McCourty, who was here earlier. I think you have to sit back when you know them intimately, as I do, where you're everyone comes from different place. Eli, his thing he had to work, people looked at as a weakness, was because he grew up in a middle-class suburban, neighborhood, predominantly white. And so for him, as a black athlete, that was like, you're weak. You're not strong. You treat women well. You speak well. So that's weak. So I think the perception is we're looking at, yes, Jameis probably has more issues than Kleenex got tissues. But the problem is we need to begin to not just look at it and judge him on that. We need to go back to training and teaching young men how to interact and how to have a great perception when it comes to people, not just females, but not women, but just each other. And I think for me, that was the toughest part about raising an athlete, is that I'm always telling to Eli, don't ever let anyone dictate to you what kind of black man you're supposed to be. Don't let anyone dictate to you what you wear, how you speak, what you are passionate about. Be your own version of a black man. And I think for a lot of men, they don't have that, especially athletes. They feel like they have to go into this bubble where I'm strong, girls, you're weak. So I think we have to attack that mentality first.
But then why is he talking to a group of fifth graders? I mean, that was really
somebody
my
invited
issue.
him.
I know they did, but that's
Yeah.
my issue. When someone has had as much baggage as Jameis Winston has and then is brought in to talk to young men and young women, that in and of itself is a huge problem. Who thought that was an okay thing to do? And what did you think he was going to say? They're actually probably lucky that was as bad as it got. It could have gotten a lot worse.
All right, I got to take a question. Mike would help. I'm going to take a question here. What are your thoughts on the sexualization of female athletes and women working in sports media?
You know, there's an unspoken rule I've learned in sports, you know, especially as a black woman who loves sports and who covers sports. They said that, you know, fans want, because my biggest problem with sports for me, having watched since I was a teenager in high school, was there was no women on sports who cover sports that looked like me. So for me, the Pam Olivers of the world, the Lisa Salters, the Sage Steeles of the world were important to me, because as much sports as you watch, as I watch, from NBA to NCAA to NFL, there were no women, because there's an unspoken rule that say in sports that the fans want women who remind them of their sisters or women who they would like to be with. And for me, it was almost like, okay, so you're a black woman, no one wants you, that's not your, you know, nobody want to be your sister, and nobody wants, so you were not beautiful enough, you're not pretty enough. I remember once we used to watch a lot of NFL Network, and I would look on there, and there was like, I'm like, okay, you're covering the NFL. It's like, what, 85% or so African American? You don't have, there's not one black woman that you can have that can actually represent and cover this sport. So for me, that was a huge thing personally, because we were deemed as, you don't really know, you know, you're just the moms. Like, there was no place for us, and that's why I think what Jemele does every day is such groundbreaking, because that's not something you saw 20 years ago.
Just to get back to you want to get to the sexualization part of things here. I mean, it's difficult, I'll be honest, when you go into a locker room and you're there to do your job, and this is kind of how I would dress to go into a locker room, and there are women there who are, you know, not there for the right reasons sometimes, or dressed in ways that, and I'm not totally conservative at all.
That are going to a cocktail party?
Yes, thank you, Andrea, for providing the image there. And it makes my job harder. I mean, I've been in a number of locker room scenarios where women were not behaving appropriately. And I say sometimes it's the networks who are asking them to be, you know, have this sexualized image. But there are also women out there who take it upon themselves, who think it's a way to get ahead. I'll just say this: it presents a problem for women who know the game, who want to do the reporting, who want to do the research, and who take this job as reporters very, very seriously. And I will admit, I actually spoke to a public relations person for a local professional team about someone who I knew was not in the locker room for the right reason. She was trying to get phone numbers, and it was entirely inappropriate. I said, I don't see how you can give her a credential, because when you do, you diminish what I'm trying to do here. And they stopped giving her a credential because they did see what I was seeing. It's not quite sexualization, but because that's sort of somebody sort of, you think, well, we can debate the word here, but that's one perspective on it.
I want to try, I'm going to hurry. I know we have to wrap this up. I want to answer one question really quickly here. It's from Aaron. Do female athletes deserve equal pay even if they don't bring in the same audience revenue? Aaron, may I please remind you that when the woman last won the World Cup, 23 million viewers tuned in. It was the most watched soccer event in U.S. history. Not that I have a chip on my shoulder about that, but let's get our facts straight before we ask our questions. Okay, I'm going to move. Go ahead.
100%, and yes, applaud that.
Andrea just went savage right there.
And 100%, because here's what happens with equal pay. Here's why equal pay is so important, because if the athletes don't get the pay they need to train and to raise their game and to be the players they are capable of being, they can't put out the product that draws the fans into the game. I have done numerous stories on young women who are working 3 jobs so they can continue playing hockey or soccer in the hopes that they will get an invitation to the national team. Now, trust me, you cannot be the caliber of player you need to be. Professional women's hockey teams cannot have the depth that they need. Women's soccer, professional soccer teams cannot have the depth that they need if players don't make the money when they're playing that allows them to focus on the game.
And the women's soccer team actually brings in more revenue than the men's team.
Yes, but even if that was not the case, this is all about, you know, you've got, sort of circling back to the beginning of the conversation, you have got to provide development opportunities in all areas of the sports world, whether it's
But I
with
think
reporters
also
or athletes.
some responsibility also has to go to the team ownership, the team. I look at the WNBA for a second, which I enjoy watching, but it's like if you don't, if no money is being invested to promote these sports, to promote women's sports, it becomes challenging for the for the fan to be able to embrace it. So I think the responsibility has to, the whole business model of that, I think, has to change, because it can't be like, listen, you got to watch us. Well, they have to kind of do a better job of publicizing.
And I think we talk about this as equal pay, but it's really equality across the board. Don't forget, with the women's hockey team, it was about travel accommodations that was equal. It was about sort of various health insurance issues. So it's a whole range of things.
I had
Equal
to
pay
laugh
is the
that
name.
the men were traveling first class and the women were traveling in coach. I mean,
Imagine
that
traveling,
sort of says it all.
12 hours
But were
on a
they on
plane.
United though?
God, I hope not. I want to ask this super quick. This is from Taylor. The last panel touched on the need for white people to join the conversation on race. How can men best do the same for gender?
Oh, I can answer that because this has been driving me crazy. There's a lot of guys out there who like to position themselves, especially online, as allies. And they talk about how I'm a feminist and everything. But when there's a panel on baseball and it's 8 white men, none of them say, hey, you should really put a woman on this panel. I'll give up my place so you can put a woman on this panel. That is a real ally, someone who's willing to lose part of their voice, part of their platform, to give it to someone else who's been marginalized and who needs that space. That's a really important issue. You know, we see panels all over the country. There was a diversity panel that was all white people, and it was all white men. I mean, it's crazy. We have to be willing to give up some of the spotlight to other people in order to help them get to where we all should be, to level out the playing field. So, there's a lot of guys out there who like to say that, oh, I totally support women, but are you really willing to put something on the line to give it up? And I think that there's a lot of lip service paid to this, but not necessarily people who are willing to put their money where their mouth is.
I think also true, but it's also not, it's about what happens outside of the spotlight. And I will say there are ways in which men and men's teams are helping out. If you go to Portland, the men's and women's soccer team have a cooperative arrangement. I think we need to see more of that, and that has made the women's soccer team, the women's professional soccer team out there, it has the largest fan base of any, and it's drawing in something like 15 or 16,000 fans a game. So I think there are models out there that are working, the WNBA and the NBA. But you need to have more of that. You need to have more opportunities where NHL teams are partnering up with NWHL teams.
And
if
just
there's a
lastly, with something that
cooperation.
they said in the race thing when they had the Bill Russell video up, and what's the name? It's like, oh, it's 2017. We have to remember that time doesn't change anything. Time only changes where we commit to change. So if we commit to change when it comes to gender issues, race issues, then we have progression. But if not, nothing would change.
All right. I have one last question it's to Dara, actually, which is good because you haven't been speaking. So here we go. To Dara, and it's actually from someone named Andrea. And the question is, how in God's name do you look the way you do when you turn 50 tomorrow?
Oh my God.
So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to join me as we end our panel. Wish
Happy
Dara
birthday
a most happy birthday. Thank you.
Happy birthday, dear Dara. Oh, for me?
Take one.
Happy birthday to you.
Do you see what they say? DT 50, baby. So, gotta have one.
Thank you,
What a
Andrea.
way to end our panel. Thank you to the birthday girl, to Annie, to
Thank
Shira,
you.
to Julie. And please join the birthday girl and the rest of our speakers. I feel like the waiter here. I'm gonna let the last refrain go. At the Career Cafe for 15 minutes, and then right after that, our final keynote interview with Bill Simmons. So please come back for that. Thank you.